Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So yeah, here's the team offtake agreements and carbon markets. Simon, my name, and will also present. So the question we were looking at is why are long-term offtake agreements not yet materializing actually in CDR projects? And I'm just going to guide you through the structure of what I'm going to present. And it's basically the research questions we basically ask ourselves and also ask the interviewees, then the challenges we identified, and then also possible solutions we're going to run through with you. And for the research questions, in particular, we had three main things we wanted to understand here in this whole field. And the first one is what is needed actually to enable and support long-term contracts for CDR or CDR credits. Then are there actually already long-term offtake agreements for CDR credits, and why or why not? And then a third question, which is quite important, I think, how do the different stakeholders perceive this issue of there being CDR credits and long-term offtake agreements, or there not being them, and actually why or why not, and do the views of those different stakeholders align? And in order to answer those questions, we contacted a couple of especially sellers, so carbon removal projects, because the carbon problem pack before us, they already contacted quite some buyers. That's why we focus on the sellers side as well as on the marketplaces. So in total, we interviewed like 10, 12 companies. And basically what we found, or what our perception in the beginning already was, is the following, that you have kind of a triangle that's going on, and that is the following. You have no funding, that means no projects. If you have no project, there is no trust. If you have no trust, well, there is no funding. So you have this currently kind of this feedback loop of uncertainty, which is hampering the market a little bit and the entire uptake of large scale removal. And so I'll come to the first challenge that we basically identified, and that was, or that is basically the one with project diversity, or maybe let's also call it project chaos, that leads to buyers confusion. You have so many startups, companies claiming they removed this and this much tons for this and this much money, and so we gathered a couple of quotes, and the ones I want to share with you is maybe those. They come from the same industry in that case. So somebody's saying, I don't like selling things that I haven't made yet, while another person says, we only have experience with future offtakes. That's from the same solution provider, or not the same solution provider, but the same solution from biochar. So there's a big contrast between those sellers, and that of course leads to differences in trust and also a lot of learning that still needs to be done by companies. And that already means that the buyers of carbon offtake agreements or carbon removal credits, they really have to put a lot of time, resources, and efforts into scaling the market, into looking what's there, and to really understand that. So the main points then from a buyer's, emitter, or sellers and remover side are the following. For a buyer, it is which solutions to actually bank on, which companies to trust. And from the seller side, there are also issues such as old school versus new school, farmers versus tech startups. And they have a quite different approach to that whole topic. Then you have large scale versus small scale project, and all of that is non-standardized and very diverse. And with that, I'll hand over to Will.
All right, thanks, Simone. So you can see our second challenge here is the misalignment of commercial interests and commercial and timelines with buyers and sellers. We can see the quotes here. The first two are actually from a carbon marketplace. So you can see that essentially the procurement process for the buyers does not really match what the sellers want. Essentially, the procurement process for buyers is usually either one time or annually, as they try and evaluate their emissions and so on. While we can see from the very third quote here, this is actually again from a biochar solution, that funding is their main problem, and they would ideally like to have contracts that are like 5-year minimum terms. So that's a very large mismatch between the buyers and the sellers. Next, thank you. So we can see the buyers here, they want to keep their options open. One, because the price of carbon is quite volatile, and two, because they're not exactly sure what their emissions are going to be, even like 5 years down the line, but sometimes even like next year, right? Especially if it's not an industry that is like consistently throwing up carbon, and there's no like real solutions for that at the moment. And then, as we discussed, the procurement process is very short-term focused, where the sellers very much want longer-term agreements so that they can have future cash flows in order to attract investment and ultimately scale up. Next slide, please. So you can see that the third challenge here was actually the carbon price volatility in itself. And we have some quotes here as well. Essentially, this was, I think, also from the carbon marketplace, such that the dynamics of the price kind of don't incentivize a multi-year offtake agreement because no one wants to, lose out to that specific price. And you can see we also have quotes here from also I think it was Biochar Solutions that they're actually happy that they didn't set a price and didn't have a long-term agreement initially because the price has essentially gone up and they would have potentially lost money because they would be capped at a certain price. Next bit, Simone. Thank you. So buyers are in this place where they're not sure if they should lock in a price now because it seems like prices are generally lower now. But again, they're not sure what their emissions may or may not be. And of course, they don't know the price trajectory. And sellers are in the place where they're worried about locking in a price now because as the price rises, they will be locked in at that price and they could potentially lose future revenue. They also are trying to justify the R&D investment from their investors when they don't really know what the price of carbon will be. Next slide, please, Simone. All right, so we have potential solutions, and you can see here's our three circles here, which is misalignment, price volatility, and diversity versus chaos. Obviously, like Simone said, we did about 10 to 12 interviews, so it's not in-depth data, but hopefully it gives you some sort of idea of what potential solutions could be. If you could throw up the first one. Thank you. All right, so the first one, as discussed, might be a futures market. So this is a mechanism we already have in other industries to sort of predict potentially the price of carbon. And then that might help with obviously the price volatility and also align some of the interest between buyers and sellers. The next solution we have is third parties. So that would be brokers that are sitting in between these two and trying to trying to matchmake the buyers and the sellers. Because they have an idea of what the sellers have and what the buyers want, they could potentially help navigate the diversity or chaos of different projects we have, therefore lowering buyer uncertainty. But it could also align values as well. And then the one that we put in the middle of here is valuing co-benefits. So if you take price volatility, if you're putting the co-benefit into that carbon credit, then because generally that co-benefit is going to be, the value of that co-benefit is going to be a lot more stable than the price of carbon, then it would hopefully sort of smooth out the ride, both on the seller side and on the buyer side. And it would also align interests a bit more, and it would hopefully help with the diversity, as buyers would, if they're interested also in co-benefits, they're only going to be after certain sellers that have particular co-benefits. So it will hopefully be a less confusing landscape. That being said, there is discussion and disagreement even within our team about where these certain things should be placed in the Venn diagram and how effective each one will be. So yeah, just to say that. Do we have any more? Yes, we do. So one we have is lock-in price. So I mentioned before that the sellers are worried about selling their credits now for a long-term agreement because they're worried that the price will increase and they will lose out for those. One strategy that we thought is like maybe you should just lock in that agreement, because even though you may the price of that agreement might be fairly low, at least you'll have future cash flows, and that might bring in more investment and therefore scale up. All right, and then the last one we have here is carbon standards, which we would all either love or hate in the carbon markets. But obviously that would help with the diversity a lot, because you would have a standard to measure these by, and you could sort of more compare this seller to this seller, even though they're in completely different sectors. It would also hopefully help with price volatility as well. I think that's all the solutions we have. I think we're on time. Thank you very much.